This week, we explore Surprised by the Spirit, a new initiative to connect Anglicans in conversation, prayer, and discovery. And we ask ourselves, what questions are we being called to wrestle with? First, I'll read a message from the Most Reverend Linda Nichols, Archbishop and Primate of the Anglican Church of Canada. We recently passed the 1-year anniversary of the declaration of a global pandemic. This has been a time of extraordinary upheaval in our lives and the life of our churches. It has also been a time of discovery. We discovered the pain of many losses, personal and communal. We discovered that we are more resilient and more creative than we may have previously thought. We discovered God in our midst, and we have been surprised by the Spirit. The Surprised by the Spirit initiative calls Anglicans across the country to explore discoveries and surprises and listen for the voice of the Spirit. Some parishes did this early in 2019, and so this exploration is a continuation of those conversations. For other parishes, this conversation will be new in formal ways, though we've likely been having them informally. Once conversations happen, participants are invited to capture the spark of surprise and depict it in some way to be shared with others across the country. Archbishop Linda notes the importance of the entire church needing to hear from one another as our journey continues, and calls us to listen to the Spirit and each other, to celebrate what God is showing us now for our future together. A celebration of these sparks will be shared Thanksgiving 2021, and I look forward to hearing them at this time. Today, I offer one of the questions people will be exploring through these Surprised by the Spirit conversations. Reflect back on your journey as a church over the past year. What questions are we being called to wrestle with? Now, I chose to reflect on this because I think as we continue to walk through the pandemic, I often have more questions than answers. We are likely not going to answer all of each other's questions, but as we continue to walk together, perhaps answers will become clearer, or we will recognize the importance of setting aside time to brainstorm ideas. Questions typically help us to grow. And so let us start to listen for the Spirit and each other in the questions that we have. Throughout the past year, 2 questions have risen up for me. My first question is, in the years ahead, how will we hold together the grief and trauma of this pandemic with the moments of hope and celebration that are happening simultaneously? We know the tragedy. Actually, perhaps we know of the tragedy close to us or that we hear of on the news. But we should also be sure to leave space in our minds and hearts for the tragedy that this pandemic has caused that we could not possibly begin to imagine or understand. The world has changed in such significant ways, and in the midst of that, people are dying, sick, and the vulnerable become even more vulnerable. This pandemic has caused grief and trauma that, in some cases, will be impossible to let go of. In another light, the pandemic has also shown many of us moments of hope and thanksgiving. Many of you have spoken to me about the joys of spending more time with your household, receiving more phone calls from loved ones, and seeing how people are creatively caring for each other. These moments of joy in the midst of the pandemic may stand out to us even more because we're yearning for them so much. Tensions like this are not new to Christianity. Think of Jesus entering into Jerusalem with shouts of joy on Palm Sunday, only to be abandoned and killed just a short while later, and then risen again. Moving forward, I believe we're called to think about how we hold this past year's tension of tragedy and celebration in our hearts, and how we may express that through our prayers and worship. The second question that came to me this past year: when we are able to gather together in person again, how will we continue to connect with people who cannot leave their homes? Our parish and many other churches across Canada have made great strides in how we pray together while apart. At Trinity-St. Paul, we continue to gather for worship online through Zoom, and we send out a church at home package each week with our service for people to use. On Zoom, we miss seeing many of the usual faces, but we have also been blessed to see new faces and hear new voices. Before the pandemic, there were countless people who could not leave their homes to journey to church. And this past year, they have been offered a variety of ways to connect into the community. This has been a gift to so many people. And as I think about a future when we are going back into the building, whenever that is, I also wonder what that means for people who have never or no longer have the option to physically get to the church. How will we continue to pray and worship with these people? How will we continue to connect with these people? How will we move forward as a true community of believers? In light of the past year, what questions have you wrestled with? What questions do you think we need to focus on as a community? What are your reflections on the questions I've just posed? It's an honor to grow in faith together, even while apart.